New York, President Roosevelt poses for cameramen and discusses the London trade parley with Secretary of State Hull.
Secretary, I'm very, very glad to welcome you and Mrs. Hull back to the United States. I'm very glad to have you here where you've been before on our porch on the Hudson River. And I want to tell you what I have already cabled you and radioed you, and that is that I'm very proud, and the country is very proud, of the splendid way in which you led the American delegation to the World Economic Conference. It's good to see you back.
I thank you most sincerely, Mr. President. I think that each of the important countries will soon be coming along hand in hand and elbow to elbow with our country in its tremendously constructive efforts to restore our domestic economy to a practical and normal basis.
Roosevelt may have rejected the movement of linking the American dollar to the price of gold, but this did not mean that he was a Nazi sympathizer. Roosevelt is famous for telling the French ambassador that
he's a madman, and his counsellors, some of whom I know personally, are even madder than he is.
Greatest peacemaker and civilizer within human
His new
experience.
policy had an unfriendly beginning. His administration refused to recognize a government in Cuba that opposed the United States. Instead, it helped bring to power a new government that showed more support for the United States. After that, however, President Roosevelt was able to prove that he wanted to improve relations with the countries of Latin America. For example, his administration sped up plans to withdraw American troops from Haiti. It rejected old treaties that gave the United States the right to intervene in Cuba. It recognized a revolutionary government in El Salvador. It recognized the right of Panama to help operate and protect the Panama Canal, and it helped establish the Export-Import Bank to increase trade throughout the Americas. As a result of the Good Neighbor policy, Hull was able to negotiate trade agreements with 10 Latin American republics by 1938, which led to an increase of 166% in the volume of American exports to these countries. However, one country would prove to be a problem for the American government, and this was Mexico. In March 1938, President Cardenas of Mexico nationalized mainly British and American oil companies. The reaction of the leaders of the American oil companies was direct military action, but this changed when Roosevelt argued that stern action over oil nationalization would create problems for US businesses' interests in Mexico. Instead, the companies had to settle with $24 million of compensation. Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy helped to improve relations with other nations in America. By doing this, Roosevelt attempted to unite the entire country and prevent conflict between Northern and Southern America. It could perhaps be suggested that Roosevelt was predicting a possible conflict in the West, and so wanted to unite his country as much as possible through trade to prevent any interfighting in case America was to become involved in the greater conflict. This was the Second World War.
With trouble brewing overseas, it looked like it was inevitable, and America would join its allies once more. But there was great resentment within America. World War I had ended 15 years previously, and was still fresh in the minds of many Americans. The First World War had been deemed in American society as an event which must not be repeated. As with many other countries, like all countries after the war, America was looking for a scapegoat to blame for the event. In Germany, a group of people later to become the Nazis, blamed the Jewish people, and this event would lead to the most horrific war crimes of all time. But in America, the scapegoat was not as damaging.
To our correspondent, Emily Moss, in America. Good evening.
Thank you, Rachel. Their scapegoat was the arms manufacturers. A study by the Senate under the leadership of Gerald P. Nye concluded that it was indeed the arms manufacturers who had tricked the US into entering the First World War so they could profit from the sales of their products. An article in Fortune magazine in 1935, which this will be a copy of Fortune's magazine from 1935, said that the motto of the arms manufacturers was, "When there are wars, prolong them. When there is peace, disturb it." And along with this document was the publication of Walter Mills's book, The Road to War. Mills blamed British propaganda, the heavy purchases of US arms by the Allies, and Wilson's favouring of the Allies and upsetting Germany unnecessarily were to blame. Documents like these that were made ready available to the public made 71% of Americans in a public opinion poll completed in 1937 believe that it had been a mistake for the USA to fight in World War I. With public opinion so opposed to conflict, it was no surprise that the 1935, 1936, 1937 Neutrality Acts were passed through Congress. The first act forbade the sale of munitions to all belligerent nations whenever the President proclaimed a state of war existed between them. This act was followed by a second act that banned all loans to the countries, with a third act extending to civil wars. The fourth act forbade American citizens to travel on ships and said the sale of all goods to these nations should be on a cash and carry basis. This meant that the countries paid for the goods before receiving them and were then responsible for carrying them home without US help. On these points, it can be argued whether Roosevelt really was acting in the best interests of his people. Although being proven in 1937 that 94% of Americans felt that US foreign policy should aim at keeping out of wars rather than help prevent them in the first place. Roosevelt at the time was trying to act in the best interests of his people. He supported the policies they wanted through and tried to prevent them getting involved in the rumblings of war in the West. By creating the Neutrality Act, Roosevelt tried to appeal to his people, but it can be argued today that this was not, in fact, the best interests of his people.
When war erupted between China and Japan sent the American gunboat Panay, Roosevelt knew that soon policy would have to be changed. There was also an increasing dictatorship across the world. Dictatorship that was threatening democracy, and America was rejecting any involvement. The introduction of the Neutrality Acts was a bad mood for Roosevelt, because when he realised how great the threats from overseas were, it made it harder for him to try and attract them. When he attempted to test public opinion, condemning their aggressive foreign policies, and spoke vaguely of the quarantining aggressor nations, storms of protest from the isolationist press began. It would be extremely difficult to change public opinion after following opinion for so long. How would Roosevelt be able to change public opinion? There were another reason preventing America from entering the war. Roosevelt also had the problem of having a weak military, something that would not be useful should you wish to enter a stage of war.
When war did break out, Roosevelt was lucky. Most Americans sympathised the Allied cause because they felt threatened by the movement of Nazism. Many Latin American countries were beginning to adopt this doctrine into their society, and this meant that American democracy was threatened. In September 1939, Roosevelt tried to repeal the Neutrality Acts, but still, America would not get directly involved in World War II.
Final destruction of Nazi tyranny.
There was not a declaration of war from Roosevelt until
This is not a drill. This is not a drill. General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle station.
Dawn, December 7, 1941, the Pacific Ocean. A Japanese task force was also heading for Oahu. Mission, sneak attack. Primary targets, Pearl Harbor and Hickam Field. Exactly at 0600, the fateful signal was given. And the first wave, 200 fighters, horizontal bombers, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers roared off.
The two historians, Justice Donnock and Mark Stoller, show completely different views on Roosevelt's foreign policy. Donnock argues that there were serious flaws in Roosevelt's foreign policy leadership, with Roosevelt relying too much on the tactics of compromise and evasion, skills that served him well in American domestic politics, but were not well suited for international relations. Donnock, Roosevelt appears to be a dangerously incompetent president who did not do a single thing correct in his conduct of foreign policy.
But Stoller presents a Roosevelt who is flawed, but better than any alternative at the time. But in all fairness to Roosevelt, his policies were not entirely flawed.